The coffee in front of me had gone cold long before I realized I hadn't taken a sip. I sat at a cracked Formica table in a lonely gas station cafe off a rural highway, the kind of place where the air smelled faintly of diesel and bacon grease. My phone screen glowed in my hands. A viral post was tearing through Facebook. A woman's heartbreaking account of how her family had left her at a rest stop during a road trip, abandoning her for hours until a stranger stepped in to help. The comments were pure outrage. People wrote in all caps, "How could anyone do that to their own mother? Monsters. She should cut them off forever." Each word cut deeper because I wasn't just reading someone else's nightmare. I was sitting in a scene almost identical to hers, only mine had happened 3 days ago. 3 days since my own daughter, Melissa, and her husband, Derek, had driven away with my 2 grandchildren in the back seat, leaving me on a mountain highway with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. They thought I was helpless. They thought I'd sit quietly, cry, and maybe even beg to be taken back into their good graces. What they didn't know was that I held the one thing they couldn't control, the deed to the house they thought they owned. 6 months earlier, the phone had rung late in the evening. Melissa's voice was trembling. "Mom, we're in trouble," she said. "Derek lost his job, the mortgage, the kids' school tuition. We might lose the house." I had been living peacefully in my small adobe home in Santa Fe, filling my days with gardening, a local book club, and weekend drives to the desert. At 68, I thought my years of rescuing anyone from financial ruin were over. But the desperation in my daughter's voice, the same voice I had soothed through skinned knees and teenage heartbreaks, pulled me in without hesitation. "How much do you need?" I asked, already running numbers in my head, knowing I could tap into part of the pension my late husband had left me. "90,000 would cover it and give us a little breathing room," she said quietly. "Mom, you're the only person we can turn to. Sophie and Evan, they'd be devastated if we had to move again." My heart clenched. I had missed too many moments of my grandchildren's childhood already. The thought of them losing their home was unbearable. Within a week, I had transferred the money, but I wasn't entirely naive. My years as a school principal and as the wife of a man who had once been burned in business deals had taught me to protect myself. I asked my attorney to draw up a loan agreement, with me holding a lien on the house, until it was paid back within 2 years. Melissa seemed surprised, but signed without argument. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. We'll pay you back as soon as Derek finds something." At the time, I believed her. I believed every word. If only I'd known that was the first step toward the most humiliating and dangerous experience of my life. At first, it all seemed fine. Melissa called me every Sunday evening, just like she'd promised. She told me about Derek's endless job applications, about how Sophie had joined the school choir, and how Evan had finally scored his first goal in soccer. She sent me pictures, the 4 of them crowded around their kitchen table, board games spread out, laughter frozen in pixels. I told myself the sacrifice I'd made was worth it. I had helped keep them whole. But little by little, the updates started to thin out. One Sunday call became every other week. Then Melissa began answering with, "Can I call you back? We're just heading out the door." Sometimes she didn't call back at all. When we did talk, she sounded distracted, her voice bright but distant. Derek never came on the phone. Sophie and Evan were busy with homework or already asleep. The conversations became short bursts of polite words, not the warm connection I'd been craving. In March, I asked if I could visit for Evan's birthday. Melissa hesitated. "Actually, Mom, it's not the best time. Derek's parents are coming, and the house is going to be packed. Maybe next month?" Next month came and went. When I suggested visiting for Sophie's spring art showcase, Melissa said her sister-in-law was staying with them, and things were a little chaotic. It felt managed, like I was being kept at arm's length on purpose. I tried to push away the thought. Surely I was overthinking. They were just busy. Then, in late April, I accidentally got through to Sophie when I called Melissa's phone. "Grandma!" Sophie's voice was bright, full of that warm enthusiasm only kids have. I miss you so much. When are you coming to see us? Mom keeps saying you're too busy. Too busy. I sat there gripping the phone, my heart aching. Sweetheart, who's that? I heard Melissa's voice in the background, sharp. There was a shuffle, and then Melissa was on the line. Hi, Mom. Sorry, Sophie grabbed my phone while I was in the shower. Sophie said you told her I was too busy to visit. Why would you say that? I asked. There was a pause. Oh, you know kids, they mix things up. Listen, I'm running late for a meeting. Can I call you later? She didn't. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Something they didn't want me to see. I decided I wasn't going to wait for another invitation that never came. If they couldn't make time for me, I would make it myself. The following weekend, I booked a ticket to Durango, rented a car, and drove straight to their quiet suburban neighborhood. I had no idea that what I was about to see would make me question everything they'd told me. 2 weeks passed after my unannounced trip to Durango, and I still couldn't shake the image of their perfect home. The freshly painted exterior, the manicured lawn, the glint of chrome from a brand new Lexus in the driveway. They hadn't looked like a family clawing their way out of financial ruin. They'd looked like people who were comfortable, thriving even. I was still trying to decide whether to confront Melissa when she called me out of the blue. Her voice was sweet, warm, the way it used to be when she wanted to tell me good news. Mom, she began, Derek and I were talking, and we think it might be time for you to move in with us. For a moment, my chest tightened in hope. Was this her way of letting me back in? A chance to spend more time with Sophie and Evan? That's wonderful, Melissa, I said softly. I've missed being part of your lives. We've missed you too, she replied quickly. And think of how much money you'd save. You wouldn't have to pay rent anymore in Santa Fe. You could give up your place, maybe sell off some things. And with the house so big, we've got plenty of space for you to help out. Something in her tone made me pause. Help out? Yeah, you know. School drop-offs, after-school snacks, keeping up with the laundry. Derek's been so busy, and with my new remote job, I barely have time for the kids' schedules. She laughed lightly, as if it were a casual suggestion. I felt my stomach sink. This wasn't an invitation into their lives as a loved and respected mother. This was a recruitment pitch for unpaid labor. And the loan? I asked, keeping my voice even. Well, if you're living here and not paying rent anywhere else, you wouldn't need us to make payments so quickly, right? I mean, we could work something out. I let the silence stretch until it grew uncomfortable. Melissa, I said finally, we have a legal agreement. I expect it to be honored. The warmth in her voice cooled. Mom, it's just money. We're offering you a real opportunity to be close to your grandchildren. And you're hung up on paperwork? I'm hung up on promises, I replied. She exhaled sharply. Fine, but don't say we didn't try to include you. The call ended, leaving me with a knot in my chest that no amount of deep breathing could untangle. I had thought maybe this was a bridge back to them. Now it felt like they were building a different kind of bridge, one where I was supposed to carry all the weight. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the prelude to something much darker. When Melissa called again a month later, her tone was light, almost cheerful, the kind of voice I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Mom, we're planning a little Labor Day weekend trip, she said, up through the mountains, scenic drives, some easy hikes. We thought it'd be a great way to reconnect. The word reconnect pulled at something in me. I'd been so hungry for it. That sounds lovely, Oz, I said. I'd love to come. Perfect. We'll pick you up Friday morning. Pack light. We'll only be gone 3 days. Friday dawned cool and bright. I was waiting on my porch when their SUV pulled up. Sophie and Evan were in the back seat, their faces lighting up when they saw me. I climbed into the third row, hugging them both before settling in beside their backpacks and snack bags. The first hours on the road felt almost normal. We chatted about school, Melissa's new projects, Derek's search for steady work. Sophie showed me pictures from her art class. Evan read me a silly joke from a book. We stopped for lunch at a cozy little mountain cafe. After the kids wandered off to the small playground out back, Melissa leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Mom, we've been thinking," she began, her voice quieter now, "about the loan. $90,000 is a lot. We just can't pay that back right now without putting ourselves in a hole again." Derek nodded. "You've got your pension, your savings. We're just starting out. Is it really worth the strain on our relationship to hold us to some rigid timeline?" I stared at them both, feeling my appetite vanish. "We made an agreement. You promised me." "Forget the agreement for a minute," Melissa interrupted. "We're talking about family." The rest of the meal passed in stiff silence. An hour later, Derek announced we'd make one last stop before reaching the hotel, a scenic rest area off Highway 550. It was quiet when we pulled in. A few picnic tables, vending machines, a closed visitor center, mountains stretched in every direction. I got out, phone in hand, to take pictures. The sound of car doors slamming made me turn. Melissa was already in the passenger seat, Derek behind the wheel. Sophie and Evan were in the back, their faces puzzled. "Mom," Derek called through the open window, "we think it's best if we all take some space. You can find your way back from here." "What?" My voice cracked. "You can't be serious." Melissa's eyes were cold. "Maybe this will help you see what's really important." Then the SUV rolled forward, tires crunching on gravel, and I was left standing in the thin mountain air, watching the taillights disappear. When Melissa called again a month later, her tone was light, almost sweet, the way she used to sound before everything between us had grown strained. "Mom, we're planning a little Labor Day weekend trip," she said, "up through the mountains. Scenic drives, maybe some easy hikes. We thought it'd be a great way to reconnect." That last word hit me harder than I expected. I had been waiting months to hear it. "I'd love that," I said, my voice warm despite the unease still curling in my stomach. "Great, we'll pick you up Friday morning. Pack light. We'll only be gone 3 days." Friday morning arrived crisp and bright. Their SUV rolled up to my curb, Sophie and Evan waving from the back seat. The moment I climbed in, Sophie leaned over the console to hug me, Evan grinning shyly behind her. For a while, it felt almost normal. We talked about school projects, Melissa's new work schedule, and Derek's latest job leads. The children showed me videos on their tablets, pointing out silly moments from their summer. Around midday, we stopped for lunch at a rustic cafe tucked into the side of the mountain. Over sandwiches, Melissa began steering the conversation. "Mom, about that loan. $90,000 is a lot of money. We just can't pay it back right now without going under again." Derek leaned in. "You've got your pension, your savings. We're just starting out. You don't really need it, do you?" I put my fork down. "It's not about need. It's about the promise you made to me." Melissa gave a thin smile. "Sometimes you have to put family ahead of paperwork." The rest of the meal was tight, the air thick with things none of us wanted to say aloud. An hour later, Derek announced we'd make a quick stop at a scenic overlook before heading to the hotel. The SUV pulled into a nearly empty rest area. Just a few picnic tables, vending machines, and a shuttered visitor center. Pine trees lined the edge, their shadows stretching across the asphalt. I stepped out with my phone to capture the sweeping mountain view. That's when I heard the car doors slam. Not the kids' laughter, not footsteps on gravel, just the dull thud of doors closing. When I turned, Melissa was already in the passenger seat. Derek gripped the wheel. Sophie and Evan sat in the back, wide-eyed. "Mom," Derek called through the open window, "we think it's better if we all take some space." My pulse thudded. "What are you talking about?" "Get out of the car." Melissa's gaze was flat. "You made your choice when you chose money over family. Maybe this will help you rethink your priorities." The engine roared to life. Tires ground against gravel. I took a step toward them, but the SUV was already moving. I stood rooted to the spot, the cold wind whipping around me, as their taillights curved away into the trees, and my world shifted into something I no longer recognized. For a long moment after the SUV disappeared, I couldn't move. The only sound was the wind hissing through the pines and the faint buzz of an old vending machine by the shuttered visitor center. I gripped my purse like it was an anchor. Inside, I still had my wallet, my phone, and a single granola bar, my suitcase, my medications, my return bus ticket. All of it was in their trunk, now somewhere miles down the highway. I stumbled toward the tiny gas station next to the rest area. The air inside smelled of coffee and motor oil. A young man behind the counter looked up from stocking shelves. "Ma'am, you okay? You look like you need to sit down." My daughter just left me here," I said. My voice sounded distant, even to me. His brows drew together. "They left you? Here? Alone?" I nodded, and the anger in his eyes caught me off guard. "That's messed up. Hold on." His name was Caleb. He brought me a coffee, let me use the store phone, and even offered to check bus routes. With one shaky call, I reached my sister Janet in Taos. When I told her what happened, her voice went cold. "I'm getting in the car right now. Text me your location. Don't move." While I waited, I used the gas station's Wi-Fi to log into my bank account. That's when the second wave of betrayal hit. 2 charges. One for $480 at a high-end clothing store in Durango. Another for $300 at a steakhouse. Both made in the last 2 hours. They had taken my credit card information and used it while I was stranded here. By the time Janet's truck pulled into the lot, the coffee in front of me had gone cold, and my decision had gone hot. Janet hugged me hard. "You're coming home with me tonight, but after that, you're going to call your lawyer. And you are not letting this slide." That night in her warm kitchen, I called my attorney. She reminded me about the lien. If you believe the collateral is at risk, you can demand immediate repayment. If they don't pay in 30 days, you can force the sale of the house. My hands trembled as I hung up. Melissa had pushed me past the point of pretending this was just a family spat. The next morning, I called a private investigator named Mark Rivas. His voice was steady, no nonsense. "Ms. Carver, I'll find out what they're hiding," he said, "but I need you to be ready. Sometimes the truth is worse than you imagine." I thought I'd already seen the worst. I was wrong. Mark moved fast. Within 4 days, he was sitting across from me at Janet's dining table, his laptop open, a grim look on his face. "Linda," he began. "Derek was never unemployed. He's been running an unlicensed cryptocurrency investment group out of their house for over a year. The downturn he told you about? That was him losing nearly 70 grand in a single week." My stomach tightened. "And Melissa? She's been working full-time remotely for a startup in Denver since last winter, making more than she did at her old job. The whole financial crisis they pitched you was a cover." I felt heat rise in my chest. "So they lied about everything." Mark hesitated, then slid a printed screenshot across the table. "It's more than lies. I intercepted messages between Melissa and Derek from 3 weeks ago. They were planning to contact child services, claim you abandoned Sophie and Evan on the highway, and use that as leverage to pressure you into forgiving the loan." I stared at the page. In the thread Melissa had typed, "If CPS thinks she's unstable, we can keep her away from the kids until she backs down." Derek had replied, "And we'll tell the kids it's her fault, so she caves faster." The words blurred as my eyes filled with hot tears. 2 days later my phone rang. The caller identified herself as from New Mexico Child Services. She was checking in about a report filed against me for leaving minors unattended during a family trip. Within hours, Sophie and Evan were on my doorstep. With a social worker, they were allowed to visit, but only under supervision. Sophie hugged me tight. "Grandma, why did you leave us that day?" I pulled back to look at her. "Sweetheart, I didn't leave you. Your parents drove away without me." Her brows knitted in confusion. "That's not what they told us." The social worker kept a close eye on us, jotting notes. I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was war. That night, Mark called with another development. I think I found the person feeding them these tactics. Gregory Holt calls himself a family financial counselor. He's been linked to at least 3 other cases where elderly relatives were manipulated into signing over assets. How? I asked. He coaches them on emotional leverage, guilt, isolation, even false legal claims to get what they want. And he's meeting with Derek next week. Mark's voice dropped. The FP wants you to help set up a sting. I sat in the silence, my heart beat loud in my ears. They had already abandoned me once. They had already tried to turn my own grandchildren against me. Maybe it was time I stopped playing defense. The FBI agents met me in a small conference room at their field office in Albuquerque. The blinds were drawn, the air humming with the sound of the ceiling fan. Special Agent Morales leaned forward, his eyes steady. Ms. Carver, you still have the lien on their house. That gives us a legal reason for you to request an in-person meeting about repayment. We'll wire you with audio and video. Gregory Holt will think he's just there to mediate, but we'll have surveillance in place. It was surreal, sitting there as a 68-year-old retired school principal, being briefed like I was part of an undercover op. But every time I pictured Sophie's confused eyes, I felt my resolve steel. 2 days later, I walked into Melissa's living room with my heart pounding. Derek was sprawled on the couch, Melissa perched beside him, and Gregory Holt, a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit, sat across from them, his leather briefcase at his feet. Linda, Gregory said smoothly, I'm here to help you and your family find a peaceful resolution. Sometimes money gets in the way of love, and we just need to clear that obstacle. I smiled politely. Then maybe we should talk about how Derek was never unemployed, or how Melissa's been earning more than she ever told me. Melissa stiffened. What are you? And, I continued, about the false report to Child Services, the one you two sent so you could turn my grandchildren against me. Derek's jaw tightened. You can't prove that. Gregory leaned forward, his voice low. Linda, if you keep pushing, this gets ugly. You could lose access to those kids forever. If you sign over the lien today, I can make all this go away. I tilted my head, letting his words hang in the air. You mean, like you've done for those other families in Colorado Springs, Phoenix, and Tulsa? Gregory froze. Derek glanced at him sharply. Melissa's eyes darted between us. That's when the front door burst open. FBI, nobody move. Agents swarmed the room. Morales stepped forward, flashing his badge. Gregory Holt, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and elder exploitation. Derek Carver, Melissa Carver, you're under arrest for filing a false report, fraud, and attempted asset theft. Melissa's voice cracked. Mom, but I stood still, my hands clasped, watching as they were handcuffed and led out the door. The living room felt strangely quiet once the agents left. The only sound was the faint whir of the hidden mic under my collar, still recording the final seconds of their downfall. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like someone was pressing their thumb against my chest. The weeks after the sting felt like stepping out of a long, choking tunnel into sunlight. Gregory Holt's arrest made headlines across 3 states. The FBI linked him to a network of family financial counselors who had drained millions from elderly relatives using lies, forged documents, and emotional manipulation. Melissa and Derek's case moved quickly. Faced with audio and video recordings of their own voices, their own words, they pled guilty to fraud and filing a false report. The plea deal came with jail time, restitution, and most importantly, a permanent bar on them holding guardianship over Sophie and Evan. The judge granted me full custody. When I told Sophie and Evan they'd be living with me in Santa Fe, Sophie's eyes brimmed with tears. So, we can see you every day now. Yes, I said, hugging them both. Every single day. We went back to my adobe home, the one with the garden full of roses my late husband had planted. The first night, the kids and I cooked spaghetti together. Evan insisted on setting the table fancy. with mismatched candles from the pantry. Sophie drew a little sign for the fridge that said home. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from my attorney. Inside was the check for the $90,000, full repayment, ordered by the court, taken from the sale of Melissa and Derek's dream house. I stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it into my desk drawer. The money was nothing compared to the real victory. In the quiet of the evenings, after homework and bedtime stories, I sometimes thought back to that day on the mountain highway. I could still see the curve of the road as their taillights vanished. Back then, it had felt like the end of everything. Now, I understood it had been the beginning. They had tried to take my dignity, my stability, and even my relationship with my grandchildren. But in the end, they lost their freedom, their home, and the trust of the very children they claimed to protect. The biggest twist wasn't the FBI sting or the arrests. It was realizing that I didn't just survive their betrayal. I reclaimed the life they tried to cut me out of. I learned that love without respect is just another form of control, that boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're gates you open only for those who deserve to enter. And perhaps most of all, I learned this. Sometimes the family you fight to protect ends up being the family you build anew, stronger, safer, and finally, truly yours.